Such a pleasure to welcome the composer Samuel Andreev.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be in this bright and beautiful place with all of you today. I'm going to start by echoing some of the comments of Greg Hurwitz. He talked about the necessary interplay between the popular and the sophisticated in the arts, and that is absolutely right. It's certainly quite true of my own art form, which is that of music. There's always been in the Western musical tradition a productive tension, you might say, between the savant style and the popular style. You need both of those. Of course, there's a degree of elasticity there. You can go a little bit farther in one direction or in the other. This art form can tolerate that. But when it goes too far in one direction or too far in the other and stays there for too long, and when you stop having any kind of connection or any kind of dialogue between those two, then the art form begins to wilt. And that's actually an indirect paraphrase of a remark by Ezra Pound, who said that when music strays too far from the dance, it wilts. And there's a lot of truth in that. Music is a very peculiar art form in many respects because it's at the same time a completely embodied physical art form, embodied because two of the main parameters of music are melody and rhythm. Melody by way of the breath, melody being an extension of speech, and rhythm by way of the feet. So it's a very much a physical embodied art form, but it is also an intensely abstract one. Music is made up of vibrations in the air. It's not tangible. It has no particular material reality, and it's made up of patterns. Very strange, as we have these two things that coexist in music. The Western musical tradition, the things that distinguish it from other musical traditions in the world, is founded upon the notion of polyphony and counterpoint. And these are things that have developed in large part because of the existence of written music notation, the five-line staff, and the possibilities that affords us of creating these beautifully complex and rich textures, consisting of individual lines, autonomous lines, that can exist together in a coherent context. And that I see as being the fundamentals of this art form. You would think that would be straightforward and obvious, but just like everything else, as we're seeing, that too is under attack these days. And the art form has unfortunately become unmoored. And what I'm noticing in my field is that the teaching, the training of composers is completely inadequate. It's very strange because in music, of course, there are professional training programs for performers, which are at an extraordinarily high level. In fact, I think you could argue that the standards for performing musicians now are higher than they've ever been in history. Performers are incredibly well trained, by and large. Composers, not so much the case. I don't exactly understand why this is. But instead of learning the art of counterpoint and harmony and so on, and all of the sort of technical set of tools that composers need to master, instead, it's now possible to do programs in contemporary music composition or in experimental music, as is the case in Oxford right now. You can do a master's degree in experimental music. Okay, that's fine. Music is a big world. You can accommodate a vast range of styles. But increasingly, there are students coming out of these programs and others whose knowledge of music begins at around 1970, something like that. And that seems to me to not be entirely adequate. The good news is there's no reason to imagine that the talent pool has shrunk. On the contrary, if you look at the situation in the immediate post-war era, there was an entire generation that had been eviscerated effectively, and a relatively small number of people available to pursue these sorts of art forms. And of course, that's not the case today. There's a flourishing of talent, on the contrary. But the training does seem to be, to me, to be inadequate. There's the kind of a refusal to admit that there may be such a thing as a canon, a body of works, a corpus of works that can be transmitted from generation to generation, and that can give us a certain form of continuity. And on top of that, composers have somehow gotten tangled up in the university system, which is a kind of a strange thing, because when I think about some of the great American artists of the 20th century through all genres, whether it's cinema or photography or composition, poetry, one of the things that characterizes them is their extraordinary independence, their lack of willingness to be put in a box, their willingness also to plow entirely personal pathways. And instead of this, you're seeing this a generation of artists whose impulse is to say, where do I sign up to follow the rules? And how can I? It's very odd. They all want to get doctoral degrees in music composition, and they want to frame their music as research. So they're doing what's called autoethnography, which is where you write about your own experience of writing your own piece, and this somehow constitutes a form of research. I'm dubious about this, to say the least. So this is a strange state of affairs, but a lot of composers decided to get into university because they thought that would be a way for them to be sheltered from the vagaries of the commercial marketplace, right? The idea being that we don't have a kind of system of protection from the nobility. Therefore, the path forward is to become a tenured professor at Princeton or at Harvard and be able to pursue your esoteric musical pursuits without having to worry about whether they're commercially viable or not. And indeed, as Greg Hurwitz has pointed out, the pressures of the commercial marketplace are not exactly something to be sheltered from. They can actually be productive, and they have been throughout the history of music. And if you look at a composer like Beethoven, for example, it's easy to say that someone like Mozart was able to bring together the popular and the savant styles, particularly in his operas, and that's something that is not given to everybody to do in such an extraordinary fashion. Beethoven wasn't quite able to do it, not to the same extent as Mozart. But even Beethoven, even a composer like him, who was, in a sense, a kind of a 19th century avant-gardist, a composer who was always pushing at the boundaries of what it was possible to do in his art form, you see in a piece like the Grosse Fuge, which is a difficult piece by any stretch of the imagination. It's extraordinarily vehement and dissonant and complex. But he was also able to do the Art of Joy, right? And he was aware of the necessity of those two things. So my sense right now, looking at the current state of my field, is that composition students would be better off to seek out a composer whose work that they admire and try to work with them privately. And I think that is a more appropriate way to deal with the current situation rather than this kind of urge to jam into these universities that in any case don't offer any kind of pragmatic career prospects to most of them. So now as for the professional environment, once again, there is some good news, which is that more is possible than has ever been the case before. A composer who is skilled at navigating this new digital world can put together a gigantic audience rather rapidly if they know what they're doing. That gives me some measure of hope. There is, again, this sort of diffuse audience that is on a global scale that can make all kinds of things possible. There's crowdfunding. There's all kinds of new models that are very powerful. So it's entirely possible to find a way out of this malaise, but I think that it's necessary to adopt a visionary sort of attitude and to see what is now possible, and to not be hesitant about casting off this sort of stale, outworn, inadequate post-war model of public financing and institutional sort of entrenchment of the arts and into something much more vital. And this experience here at Ralston gives me that hope. This is such a beautiful thing to see. It's like an extraordinary dream. And I thank you very much for the invitation to speak here.